Genesis, one of the things that Rashi tells us in regards to Jacob, it says that he prostrated himself at the head of the bed. And Rashi comments that the divine presence was at the head of the bed because the divine presence is with the sick person where he is. So I guess as I was sick and lonely and feeling terrible, I was thinking, well, but Hashem is with me, it's with the sick. So that was a comforting thought. Okay, so it's been a while, but we were talking about the fact that the right path for a person is the middle path, the moderate path in the middle. To go with moderation. I mean, the question always is, what is moderation? It seems like sometimes you ask different people, different rabbis, you may get different answers. For example, if you ask a modern Orthodox rabbi, he'll probably tell you that the Haredi community, that they're not following a path of moderation. And if you speak to them, the Haredim, they'll maybe point to somebody more extreme. And the Hasidim, they're not being moderate. That's too extreme. So it seems to depend on who you talk to, which leaves people a bit in a quandary. I was wondering. So, but Maimonides gives us the answer in his in the laws of Deos that he has, of ideas. I don't know exactly how to translate that into English, but of different opinions and the laws of human ideas and opinions there. He discusses this whole idea of moderation. And, as we went through it, I mean, most of it has to do with human behavior, whether to be, how charitable a person should be, how disciplined, and so on and so forth. So that's pretty clear. But I think one golden rule we can take with us is the scale between when we have to do something, to think about if its effects on others, and what are all the consequences of the act. In other words, there's a time to be more extreme and a time to be less. I guess one of the first things that comes to mind is the issue of charity. I think we've talked about it in the past. If someone only has a limited amount for their own family for the Sabbath, or they can give it away to charity. Somebody, there's going to be a certain point where a person has to think about their own family, and that they should not be unhappiness in his own house, and that poor person could knock on the door of someone more wealthy and get the money. So, that's complicated. Again, it seems to be a case by case, but that's definitely something to think about. The person has to be very careful with being charitable outside the home and not being charitable at home. And also spending a lot of time in synagogue, praying and studying, and being neglectful of maybe teaching one's own children or spending time with family. There's also a good example how a person has to be moderate and not go too far, even in good things, in holy things, in terms of, frequenting the synagogue and house of study and so on, and but making sure that they're also paying attention to the people around them. So I thought those are some good examples. All right, so I'm on page 38 of Path of the Righteous Gentile, the bottom paragraph, and he's going to talk about some exceptions to taking the middle road. Says over there, paragraph 9, there are exceptions. When it comes to anger or false pride, one should strive to avoid these destructive traits to the ultimate. Anger is controlled and ultimately eliminated by speaking softly to all people at all times and in all situations. Pride is circumvented by realizing that one is nothing and achieves nothing except for what God bestows as a gift. So simple to say, not so easy to carry out, but anyway, here we have two very, very important exceptions. And it also goes to show how bad and destructive these traits are, that we make an exception and we say, when it comes to these traits, you should eliminate them completely until the end. And that is anger and pride. And I mean, look, Some of us may have experienced it, but we all know it, that anger is the most destructive thing. People do the most horrible things out of anger and thoughtlessness and cause terrible destruction, hurt people's feelings, hurt them physically, and often the people close to them. They do this. It's a horrible, horrible trait. And it often comes from a person being very unhappy with themselves, and they just lash out at others. And the critical negativity they feel about themselves, they also see in everybody around them. It's just a horrible, horrible character trait. Also, obviously, it also goes against emunah, goes against faith, because if a person believes that the situations they're in is all divine providence, then what's the point of being angry? The situation you're in is, at the end of the day, the divine will. You can argue a person could act differently. It is partially their fault. But the fact is, at this moment, this was the divine will at this moment to be in this situation. At least there's some meaning and something valuable there. There's not a reason to to get to that level of frustration. But anyway, interestingly enough, the Maimonides, which is, again, I think is being quoted here, doesn't give any type of philosophical or thought processes of how to get out of anger as he does with pride. Comes to anger, he just says self-control. That's the answer. Self-control. Don't raise your voice. Don't do it. Don't allow yourself to throw things, or that's what he's saying. Self-control. That's it. Speak softly, and eventually you'll lose the anger. He doesn't say what I said. Well, there's you should look at the fact that it's all from God and there's no reason to be upset. He doesn't say that. He just says, just exert self-control. Don't try to figure it out. And yet with pride, we do see that he gives an explanation and tells the person to think things through and realize that the results of his actions, despite any thought and effort put in, only result in success because God gives it to the person as a gift. It's not something that we can have ourselves. God gives that to us. Now the next example he gives in an exception is very actually comes from Chabad thought, and I'll try to understand it. Something called shtus de kedusha, the foolishness of holiness. Let's see what this is about. Another exception to clinging to the middle path is what is called shtus de kedusha, the foolishness of holiness, which means basically being irrationally inclined when it comes to holy things. In other words, basically, even if you say, oh, it can't be done, there's some mitzvah that we should accomplish, but it just can't. It's across a river. It's just too difficult, too cold outside, whatever it may be. Person just puts all those thoughts aside and just does it. Let's see how he explains it. This means that man, finding himself in a situation of being sunk in the pursuit of physical pleasures, even permissible physical pleasures, must sometimes act in the extreme to counter the situation and eventually achieve moderation. So that's not exactly as I said it, but the way he seems to be explaining it is the person has to go to the extreme away from physical pleasures, I guess, to counter the complacency of person's involvement in physical pleasures and I guess relaxation or something like that. Anyway, but the way I understand it is a little bit different. It means that sometimes people tell us, so there's a voice in our head that says, nah, that can't be done. You can't do that. That you have this idea of doing something really good, helping someone or otherwise, or basically the idea is in a situation where it may look silly to people or it may seem extreme and people will say you shouldn't be doing that and it's something positive and good and your conscience says do it, you should do it and not listen to those voices that say that's silly or you're going to look foolish and things like that, but just do the good thing, do the right thing. One of the examples is given from the Talmud of a certain scholar who used to dance and make merry at weddings, And that was considered something the foolishness of holiness, even though he was a well-known rabbi. He didn't hesitate to act in a comedic fashion and weddings in order to make merry at a wedding, which was a tremendous mitzvah. So there's an example of holiness, of the foolishness or irrationality when it comes to something holy that we should engage in. Okay. I would add that it's something let's go out of our comfort zones a little bit. We also can get into holy habits. For example, a person has a certain amount of time in the morning where they may study, Torah in the morning, and they may go to synagogue or have a Torah session in the evening. And that might be it. And that becomes their habit, and they don't have any more, and because they're working or busy. And then as they, for example, retire, they have more time, they still don't change it because they're so habituated that this is their norm that they don't add any more time for Torah study or learning with others. And the idea of this foolishness of holiness is to take a jump and say, no, we're going to make things different. We're going to do more, even though it feels like a little bit much for me, or it just feels weird because I'm so unaccustomed to it. Do what we're unaccustomed. Go a little bit out of your comfort zone. Okay, now we're on page 39, paragraph 10. In order to assure success in one's strivings, it is important to select a respected friend as both a consultant and a confidant. So in other words, the person should have someone they can talk to about things and get advice. When matters of doubt or concern arise pertaining to the performance of the 7 laws of Noah, another's assessment of the situation will provide objectivity in determining the appropriate course of action. This is called asel acharav. Attain a teacher for yourself. This spiritual buddy system will expand one's perspective and clarity, objectives that can be met even if the advisor is less than a towering genius or spiritual giant. What is desired here is the ability to open up in a sincere dialogue. This can be achieved even when an advisor who is on a lower level, even when the advisor is on a lower level than the one seeking the advice. So basically the idea is talk it out, talk it over with others, have a good friend who's also adherent to the 7 laws, and talk out things with them and see what they think. We all have points in our lives where we come to conflicts, we have moral conflicts. And those are really the times we really need someone else to talk to. It's very hard to make those decisions ourselves because, we're caught up in the issues and in the personalized, and it's personal, and it can confuse the mind. And to be sure we're doing the right thing, it's good to talk to a friend, or in this case, or a teacher or a friend. Sometimes it's really hard to find a teacher that you're comfortable with, who knows us well enough. And that's why a good friend is also on the same page as us with the 7 laws of Noah, is often really even more helpful than a teacher. Okay, any comments on any of this so far? All right. Okay. Yes? No? Maybe so?
Well, I'm just, you just described my friend Charlie perfectly, with the person to talk to, and we've gone through this together, and it is so true. You've got to have that person that you can talk to about anything, even, and no matter how outlandish I might say, well, what about this? She's not going to think I'm totally crazy, that will listen to me. So she's my person.
And you're probably her person.
I hope so.
You're very lucky ladies, both of you, to have a friend like that and someone the same values as yourself. So many people don't have that. I don't find it so easy actually myself to find someone who you can really openly speak to. So it's a very, very lucky thing to have. We really have to try to find it. And but luckily there are a lot of answers and a lot of books. So I just keep reading, and what I can't get from friends, I try to get from my studies. But it's a tremendous blessing to have that. Okay, one more paragraph. The next paragraph is just so powerful and so encouraging. And it's actually from Maimonides at the ends of the Laws of the Jubilee. He says this, I believe. We'll look it up in the back because it's really worth knowing and taking a look at it in the original source. Paragraph 11. Every person on the earth whose spirit is humble and who differentiates between good and evil in order to be able to stand before God, to serve him and know him, and walk upright in his path, removing the yoke of the scheming and calculating with which most people conduct their lives, sanctifies the Holy of Holies, or is sanctified as like the Holy of Holies. God will be this person's portion and inheritance in this world and the world to come forever and ever. And he will merit success in all his material efforts in this world. As it is written, seek the Lord while he may be found, call upon him when he is near. Isaiah 55. So the door is open to everyone to seek to do what's right, to contemplate on God's wisdom and greatness, and come close to him. So this is the end of chapter 3. So if you look in the back of the book, it says Mishnah Torah, laws of the sabbatical and Jubilee years, chapters 13, law 13. I believe this is the one. So powerful words from Maimonides. Every person whose spirit is humble and differentiates between good and evil in order to be able to stand before God, to serve him and know him, and walk upright in his path, removing the yoke of the scheming and calculating, sanctifies. I think it's actually is sanctified like the Holy of Holies, but you can check it out. Powerful words there. I want to share with you a little idea from this week's parsha. I think it's this week's parsha. I've been out of synagogue for so long. I may have gotten it wrong, but I don't think so. Anyway, this week is the parsha Mishpatim, the civic parsha chapter on the different civil laws of the Torah given by God to Moses. And not until that's complete do we start talking about the laws of the tabernacle later on, to follow the weeks after that. And I think there's a tremendous lesson there. First, we talked about obviously the big ones, the 10 Commandments, which were an equal mix of how to behave in terms of our relationship with God and how to behave in terms of our relationship with man and our family and so on, and our neighbors. And but yet, as we get into more details, we really delve in deeply into the nitty gritty of everyday life and money matters and servants and lending money and so on and so forth before we can get to the temple. So before we can get to the temple, we have to treat each other fairly and correctly and morally and really care about those things. We can often, I think, a religious person can, if not careful, can get lost in the spiritual and can get lost in, thinking about God and prayer and things like that and forget about things like balancing their checkbook, making sure they don't bounce a check to somebody or making sure they pay back a loan that they took and things like that. We can forget, we can, kind of, it doesn't feel like that's not religion, but that is part of Judaism, that we behave properly in an upright manner when all these things, even when it comes to different types of money matters. And evidently, this is something that God and Moses was given to Moses to declare to the people before we get to the temple. So, important point. All right. Any questions on this so far before we move on to our next World of the Ger adventure? Okay. So we were in the middle of talking about Naaman last time. We're still in the middle of it, I believe. So we got to try to finish it today. So we were on page 82, I think. I think we did the paragraph saying Elisha wants no material reward for his righteousness. So I'm going to start from the paragraph starting with the word Naaman changes the subject. It says there, that's on page 82. Naaman changes the subject and requests something from Elisha. He asks for permission to take a wagon load of earth in order to build a sacrificial altar back home in Damascus. This is another defining moment. By showing his respect for the soil of the land of Israel, he demonstrates his love for the land and his respect for God and the Jewish priesthood. The Baal HaTurim writes, Phinehas and Hophni, the two sons of Eli, the high priest, desecrated the priesthood by their actions, whereas Naaman showed his respect for the priesthood by building his sacrificial altar from the earth of the land of Israel. In the end, Phinehas and Hophni were killed for their misdeeds, and Naaman was brought into the wings of the Shekhinah, and his grandsons became great scholars of the Torah. So this act was a really powerful act of respect that he did and that he showed towards the land of Israel, the Jewish people, and the priesthood. Next paragraph. By asking Elisha's permission to take the soil, Naaman demonstrated that he had become scrupulously observant of the Noahide prohibition against theft. He has not merely rejected idolatry, but has taken upon himself the entire doctrine of the 7 Noahide laws. So, because there is an opinion that it's permitted to dwell in the land of Israel. Rashi brings it in the Chumash, as long as the non-Jew doesn't engage in idolatry. So he's explaining to us now, the author, that Naaman embraces all the 7, and that's why not only idolatry does he reject, but theft as well. And now Naaman brings to Elisha a problem he must face. It is a problem that every Noahide ger must deal with in some form or another. Sooner or later, the Noahide will return home to live among idol worshippers. These are his people. He loves them and must remain at peace with them. So Naaman asked Elisha that God should forgive him for returning to his previous way of life, because he's going to live it as a pretense. The issue centers on the king of Aram, in whose dominion Naaman must live. As the king is trusted aide, one of Naaman's duties is to accompany the king when he visits the temple of the local Aramean god. The last place on earth that Naaman wants to be is in the temple of Avodah idol worship. But the king requires it of him, and when the king bows down before his idol, Naaman will be expected to bow along with him. But in his heart, Naaman will be bowing only to the God of Israel. Elisha blesses him with Lech LaShalom, go towards peace, meaning that God will be with Naaman now and forever, even in times of danger and places of darkness. The spiritual filth that Naaman grew up with is no longer part of him. The foreskin of his heart has been circumcised, and so Naaman departs from Elisha, prepared to be a lonely man of faith, a ray of light in the midst of darkness. It's bringing out this issue of loneliness, and I think it's also there's a frustration when a person has such a deep belief and yet can't show it and has to force themselves to behave in a manner that they don't believe in. I think it's a very difficult and torturous thing to have to go through. But yet he asked the question, and Elisha's basically telling him you can bow there and go in peace. You can go back to your life without shaking things up too much. So that's as far as that's the end of the dialogue between Naaman and Elisha. Next paragraph. Now, the ger program takes an unexpected turn. Gehazi, Elisha's disciple and assistant, enters the scene. Gehazi is not a man of God like Elisha, his master. Gehazi is a predator. He knows that Naaman is as innocent as a child who only wants to do the right thing. Gehazi sees his chance to benefit from this, because Naaman is wealthy and has brought a fortune in gold and silver with him. This is also something that I think could be very relative to the B'nai Noach community, in that sometimes, not, in their innocence and not being knowledgeable maybe about different rabbis or different leaders, they may, God forbid, get attached to someone who's a bit of a charlatan. I'm not saying that I know this from experience, but a person has to be careful not to fall prey to someone who wants to take advantage of them economically or something like that, and really isn't who they put themselves out to be. So that's seems to be what the issue over here with Gehazi was, such a person, predatory person. So Gehazi pursues Naaman and swindles him out of a prodigious sum of money, deceiving Naaman by conjuring up a total lie. He tells a lie in the name of Elisha, saying, "My master sent me, saying, just now 2 young men have come to me from Mount Ephraim. They are disciples of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 silk tunics." So he makes up a story that Elisha asked for some expensive items from him. Still flushed with joy and feelings of generosity, Naaman says to Gehazi, "Please take 2 talents." Naaman's free will offering is profoundly symbolic. It is as if he spoke prophetically without realizing it. Torah scholars, and all the more so disciples of the prophets, are compared to the gold-plated wooden beams that form the walls of the tabernacle Moses built at Mount Sinai. Under every wooden beam of the tabernacle were 2 massive silver sockets, each weighing 1 talent. The silver sockets were forged with half-shekel donations given by the children of Israel as a redemption for their souls, as it says. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "When you take the sum of the children of Israel, according to their number, each man shall give a ransom for his soul to the Lord when you number them. There be no plague among them." So famously, this is the chapter in Exodus 30, which talks about how you count the children of Israel. It talks about the half shekel that should be given as part of the census, and that they shouldn't be counted separately without giving this sum. Rashi there explains that the half shekel was collected on several different occasions for several different things. There's a half shekel that was given for the public sacrifices that were brought, the regular daily sacrifices. There was also the half shekel that was given in order towards the building of the temple, and specifically for these adanim, specifically for these base supports for the beams of the tabernacle. Okay. Page 84, second paragraph. Naaman has symbolically offered a 2-talent silver ransom for his soul. From this standpoint, this is all good. Even though he was swindled, Naaman has fulfilled the mitzvah of giving tzedakah. So from his point of view, it was a mitzvah. That's also important to keep in mind. What a tremendous lesson. Sometimes people are worried, gee, if I give this money for charity, but how can I trust this person? Well, I wouldn't give big sums to someone we don't trust, but a little bit of money, I think it's worth the risk to give a little bit of charity. And either way, you get the mitzvah, even the person wasn't 100% honest. But all is not well with Gehazi. Naaman suspects that Gehazi is lying, but gives anyway. Gehazi has desecrated the name of God by implicating the prophet Elisha in his deception. And so Naaman returns home, his body purified and his soul redeemed by the God of Israel. It says, "Thus says the Lord, you are my witnesses and my servant whom I chose, in order that you know, believe me and understand that I am he. Before me no God was formed, and after me none shall be. I am the Lord, and besides me there is no Savior." Isaiah 43. So I'm not sure why he's quoting that here. He's implying that this refers to Naaman. But either way, the point is that through this whole experience that Naaman has gone through, meeting the righteous prophet Elisha, and his immersion and so on, and his acceptance of the 7 laws, his both body and soul have become purified. That's a wonderful thing. And I think the point is that's something also that every Ben Noah goes through upon accepting the 7 laws. Okay. As for Gehazi, his sin was very great. Elisha prophetically saw exactly what Gehazi did and said to him, "Now Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your children forever." And Gehazi slinks away, stricken with leprosy. That's horrible. An interesting question you can ask is, why should leprosy cling to him and cling to Gehazi's children? Why so far? And obviously, like the idea of why should the children be judged for his sin, unless you say that they follow in his father's ways. And we're talking about a case in which the children follow in the father's ways. But the question remains. Okay, next paragraph. The Mishnah tells us that Gehazi was one of the 4 commoners who were punished by losing their share in the eternal world. The 4 are Balaam, Doeg, Achitophel, and Gehazi. Balaam maliciously caused a plague that took the lives of 24,000 Israelites. Doeg murdered the 500 Kohanim because they had fed a starving King David in the time of Saul, right? Achitophel advised Absalom to rape David's concubines in public view to show that he was now the king. Gehazi swindled Naaman out of some money and clothing, and all these different 4 commoners lost their portion in the world to come. Gehazi does not seem to belong to that group of truly evil men. Gehazi was greedy and foolish. The others were monsters. Yeah, it doesn't seem like that for swindling he should have lost his portion in the world to come. That doesn't seem to square equally. But the truth is that Gehazi does belong there with the others. Gehazi gave Naaman an excuse to believe that Jews are greedy, money-hungry predators. Gehazi's greed and foolishness has brought shame to Elisha and to the entire Jewish people. There's no greater desecration of God's name than this. That could be, but it also could be that Gehazi lacked faith in God, and that he lacked faith and belief in reward and punishment. And that's why that even though he was with a prophet and a disciple of a prophet, he still behaved the way that he did because he was lacking in some basic tenets of faith. Does it say this anywhere? No, but it's an assumption that I'm making, because the question is extremely strong of why he should have lost his portion in the world to come completely for stealing. It's a serious crime, but it's something that he should have to pay recompense, and he was already punished harshly by given leprosy. So it's hard to understand why he still lost his portion in the world to come, unless you say that how could it be that he was the disciple and living right next to a prophet and still behaved in this way? You have to say that his perception and his beliefs were cynical, and he didn't believe in God fully and in the truth of the prophet fully, and that's why he can behave in such a manner. I mean, the point, you have to understand, how could someone behave like that and be right next to such a holy person? There must have been a real wall in terms of his belief, in terms of his overall acceptance of some very, very fundamental things. Ross, you have a question?
Well, a possible observation, if you will.
Yes.
Naaman chose to ask for permission to take the soil, and Elijah had already refused the money once. So what Gehazi did was kind of like he got greedy, and he didn't ask for personal charity. He said, "Oh, my master has changed his mind, and now he wants some money because a couple of people showed up." So he's lying on behalf of somebody else. He's putting words in the prophet's mouth.
Yeah. He's making the prophet look bad.
Right. He's really stacking them up here.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I mean, it's just really severe to say that someone doesn't have any portion in the world to come. I mean, let's look at it this way. Let's say someone who's been Noach, falls and unfortunately steals, and then they're punished, with leprosy. I mean, should they lose their portion in the world to come completely because they stole? I mean, I don't know. How about this? If they're, I mean, leprosy is similar to the death penalty. The person is alienated for life. They suffer for life. It has similarities to leprosy. And in fact, I think Rashi mentions that when the verse, it says that God tells Moses that all the people who sought your life are dead. Rashi says this is referring to Dasan and Aviram, who got leprosy or something, and therefore they're no longer a threat. So we see there's a comparison of death with leprosy. So I don't know. I'm just asking as a question. I don't really, I don't have a clear answer, but this is what the Mishnah tells us, that he lost his portion in the world to come. Extremely serious, extremely severe. I personally believe it has something to do with his close proximity to Elisha, and yet his failure to learn from his ways. This shows a very, very deep problem with Gehazi. Let's see for the last paragraph, and then we'll take more questions. That's on page 85. Gehazi serves as a warning for future generations. Be careful with the ger. God loves the ger, and therefore so should you. As it says, love the ger, for you were gerim in the land of Egypt. The ger is Naaman, a foreigner who sojourned among Israelites like the Israelites sojourned among the Egyptians. And when he returned home, he became a righteous Gentile, a ger among idolatrous Arameans. So he's also telling us the reason for the seriousness is because, the bad example and the bad impression, the bad taste and abuse that he gave to a ger, Naaman, is also the reason why his punishment was so serious and so severe. Questions, comments? We're going to finish early tonight. Anyway, I don't want to cut. Let's hear everyone's comments, but I'm going to stop here because we're finished the Path of the Righteous Gentile tonight. That's a tremendous accomplishment. I think we read it from cover to cover, just a little out of order. And we finished the section on Naaman, except let me get quiet. Ross, you had some other question or comment you want to make? Please go ahead.
One other observation, and then it was the situation where Miriam had spoken up said something apparently unpleasant against Moses. She was stricken with leprosy for a week, placed outside the camp. So again, you said it was equated with death. Well, she had to be put outside of the camp.
Yes,
but it's not like it was a loss of the position in the world to come with her. You just have to look, I guess, at Gehazi and say that it was multiple layer type situation. She just made an off the cuff remark.
Right. I think also, as he says, that this was a tremendous desecration of God's name that he did, because he's representing the prophet. He represented the prophet as some type of swindler, because he had the idea that Elisha should first say no and then change his mind, just made a very bad impression. It seems to imply that some kind of double thinking, or he decided that he did want to take some money. It just looked really bad. And so that was a desecration of God's name, and made the prophet who represented God also looked somehow scheming. And that was really a really bad thing. Okay, anyone else have any comments on any of this? Okay. I think there's another aspect to Naaman, is that he was a man with such a high position and yet humbled himself to Elisha. And he also humbled himself to the fact that once he realized the truth, he didn't try to make excuses or just take what he can get, take the healing and then just leave it alone. No, he took it all the way. He went all the way. Once he saw that this was the truth, he accepted God as the true God, and abandon all the other beliefs. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially as someone in his position. It would be much easier to rationalize things and just go back to your life the way it was. Instead, he had to go back and live a life of a hidden life, and at the very least, he would have to kind of be humiliated at least once a year with the king and do something he really didn't believe in, and maybe many others around him knew he didn't want to do. So his life really, really changed. He went from living a comfortable life, kind of, with the elites and on the same page, as being on the outside and yet rejoining and being dominated by them. Tough thing to do, but he did it. It's not easy to be in exile to be among a majority of people who don't think as you do, and to have to stand out and have to be the nonconformist. And not only that, sometimes even to have to humble yourself and know that they're more powerful than you, and be silent. Not an easy way to live. And it's a very humbling way of being forced to live. It certainly would bring a lot of humility to the person that has to live that way. And that's a good thing, but a hard thing. All right. I think that is for tonight. I want to congratulate you all who've been with me on this journey. It's been amazing to go through this entire book. It's kind of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch for Noah. This is like the shortened version of the 7. It gives you, it really does. I mean, the differences of opinion, whether everything he says there is binding, a lot of it is from Maimonides, but I think it's a great GPS for the Ben Noah. It's a great GPS. You look up, got all the basics in there. So next week, we're going to start with theory and practice, and we're going to get into his philosophy of what exactly, the bases philosophically is for the Ben Noah. And has a lot to do with the image of God, and we'll get into that. And then there's tons and tons of, wealth of information on the Noahide laws that's brought in that book. We studied some of it in the past, but we'll get into it a lot more in the future. So we'll be doing that, and we'll be continuing with the world of the Ger. And all right, that's it. People, it's a pleasure. And may we go from strength to strength, strength to strength. Let's see, somebody in the chat, I think it was a thank you. Oh, you're very welcome, Diana. Thank you for everyone who joining. You make the class stronger and more beautiful. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right, good night. Laila Tov, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Good night. See ya.